Oh, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 5 of our class. So, let's start out by talking about papers. So, I'm hoping to be able to get the rest of your paper proposals by tonight. This is Sunday. I'll have this posted tonight or early tomorrow morning, before week 5. We're now getting into week 5, and at the end of week 6. So, March 14th, I want your first paper to be due. And I want to let you know as you're drafting them, as you're thinking about them, that if you're able to get me your paper within 48 hours of the due date, I will grade it within 24 hours and give you a tentative grade. And you can choose to either keep that grade or you know address the problems that I marked and get a higher grade. So I've got the hiccups. You shouldn't have hiccups when you're recording a professional video. So, anyways, that's paper writing, and as you are sending me your paper proposals, I will be giving you feedback and letting you know whether or not, or not whether or not, but just giving you my feedback to help you improve the thesis and hopefully have an easier time as you get researching and writing. And I hope that this is your favorite part of the class, because really doing serious research projects is something that will serve you well in whatever career you choose, and it is a skill that will, uh, you know, set you apart from the competition, but also help to lift up the competition by doing good, serious, focused research and learning, or improving your skills at using scholarly sources. So I want you all to be better writers and critical history thinkers at the end of the semester than you are right now. Even if you're really good now, hopefully you will improve. So this is the first week of using the book, one of the books. I love the book that you're starting with this week. When Northrop published it, Africa's Discovery of Europe, your cover might not look like mine. That's okay. There's a couple different editions of it. But when this book was first published, I mean, it hit kind of like a bombshell. History writing in Africa and about Africa seems to be entering into a really new golden age right now as we speak. I mean, this book is a little old now. Not that they haven't had such periods of amazing history writing before, but as stability and prosperity are expanding across the continent, from powerhouses in the West like Nigeria, and I know that things are not totally stable in Nigeria, and Ghana, to innovative places in the east like Kenya, Rwanda, even Uganda, to stable places in the south like Botswana, as well as the northern fringe of the continent. I'm optimistic that the next few decades, that the next century even, will be a period when those wishing to do business or like me engage in academia can't afford to overlook the entire continent of Africa. I mean, this is an amazing period in African history right now. But for much of our recent history, Africa has not been an area with a very rich tradition of globally accessible historical literature. That's not to say that there haven't always been incredible African scholars as well as outsiders in the broad African diaspora and even non-African descended people who haven't been doing top-notch work. It was just hard to do such work when Africa was devastated first by the slave trade, then the horrors of colonialism, followed by the almost continent-wide proxy wars of the Cold War. That's within my lifetime, where former European colonial powers, as well as Soviet, American, Cuban, and even Chinese advisors, meddled quite violently in local politics, helping to sometimes cause and almost always inflame decades of horrific violence. So, in these conflicts, millions of people died, and hundreds of millions suffered from the poverty, starvation, and economic malaise that always accompanies war. And when you're dealing with that kind of conflict, well, you don't have time to write history books. So, what's happened only very recently, though, is that with the end of the Cold War rivalry, many parts of Africa have finally been left alone by outside powers. Um, Not true of resource rich regions like Congo, but in much of the continent, things are looking up. So apartheid in South Africa has been officially over for decades. Officially, its stink lingers on. But as Africans have been able to manage their own affairs, it turns out that in most cases, they're actually pretty good at it. So letting Africans take charge has led to some miraculous turnarounds, like the now prosperous country of Rwanda, which only 27 years ago experienced one of the worst genocides of the 20th century. So my goal with today's lectures is lecture is to show in broad brushstrokes how a few parts of Africa were part. So, we're not talking about Africa today. We're talking about Africa 500 and 600 years ago. So I want to show in broad brushstrokes how a few parts of Africa were part of and negotiated with the broader world before falling victim to the whims of European colonialism. It's a story that Northrop masterfully tells. He also tells it quite densely, and it can be hard to follow at times. I hope to be a little more clear in this presentation, but if I'm not, then maybe you can make sense of our two approaches together, and certainly talk to me. Always feel free to talk to me. So I can think of no better way to start a discussion of Africa's connections to the rest of the world in the period of archaic globalization and thereafter than the picture on this slide. With my face in the way. Let's move my face out of the way. So it's of a church in the town, the village really, of Lalibela in north central Ethiopia. And if you look closely at this church, you'll notice it's probably unlike any other church you've seen before, unless you're familiar with Ethiopia. This church is not built. It is carved. And just to get an idea of the scale of it, look at this person sitting on the steps down at the bottom. This is a huge, monumental architectural masterpiece carved out of a single piece of stone into the ground. Uh, and it's not alone. There are about a dozen of these all around this region of Ethiopia. It's got a sophisticated drainage system underneath to keep it from turning into a swimming pool. But these churches, they're carved right into the ground. So the king Lalibela, for whom the town is named, commissioned these carvings in the 1100s. Just imagine the amount of labor and money this would have taken when the violence of the Crusades made Jerusalem inaccessible for Ethiopian Christian pilgrims. Christianity's history in Ethiopia goes back to the very beginning of Christianity. The book of Acts in the Bible, for example, records an Ethiopian who was baptized by the Apostle Paul. And then later, you have the story of Frumentius, who convinced the king to accept the faith. So the kingdom became officially Christian in 330, long before many European countries adopted Christianity. Ethiopians also had a strong Jewish tradition preceding this, and that tradition continued. So Ethiopia, in addition, was crucial to the founding of Islam, as the Prophet Muhammad escaped there from those trying to kill him in Mecca in what Muslims call his hijra. So three dominant Abrahamic faiths have deep roots not only in Ethiopia, but in many other parts of the continent as well. So that's one of the reasons I often bristle when people call these religions outside religions to Africa. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism all have deep, deep roots in the African continent, and in different parts have been part of Africa since the very beginning of the religions, and have benefited from African involvement and engagement with those religious traditions. So the continent is of course huge and diverse. So there are many other fascinating religious traditions in Africa as well. But these churches in particular represent both African connections to the rest of the world, as well as their ingenuity when one of the big disasters we've discussed so far, the Crusades, cut off these connections. So part of your reading, let's skip. So part of your reading here, I'll put myself at the base of El Cid. Deals with the early period of contact between West Africans and the Portuguese. So I want to contextualize just a bit why the Portuguese were seeking contacts with Africa. And I want to do so within the framework we've been using to make sense of the world in our class so far. So as I mentioned briefly, during the first and third weeks, the Iberian Peninsula, meaning Spain and Portugal today, had been almost entirely conquered by Islamic forces in the 700s when Islam was first spreading across the Middle East and Mediterranean regions coming up from North Africa. The Visigothic Christians, who previously ruled the peninsula, held out in the northern regions of the country that was largely populated by Basque speakers. They formed the kingdom of Asturias, which would split up soon thereafter. Think of a mini version of Charlemagne's empire to the north, into Leon, Galicia, and Castile. I once heard an indie hipster band called the Kings of Leon, which is kind of funny because those kings had names like Sancho the Fat or Sancho the Strong or Ordoño the Wicked. I prefer my last name personally to any of these kind of epithets. But anyways, these kingdoms help to account for the really rich regional diversity of Spain today. So by the time the Crusades got going, various popes would encourage knights who couldn't afford the trip to the Middle East to instead take the discount crusade option of fighting in the Iberian Peninsula, what would be called the reconquering or reconquista. So Pope Innocent II in particular was annoyed by how much knights enjoyed what he considered to be the murderous sport of jousting, and instead tried to encourage them to take that testosterone where it was needed, Spain, or the Holy Land, but Spain if they couldn't afford to get to the Holy Land. So as the Crusades began to go poorly in the Middle East, they they were going well in Spain. So this picture is of the legendary fighter El Cid in modern-day Spain. By 1252, only a small outpost of the former Cordoba Caliphate, ruled by the Almohads, remained around the Rock of Gibraltar in the south of Spain. So by this time, the dominant, largely Christian states were the monarchies of Castile and Aragon, along with Portugal. So in 1492, the combined monarchies of Castile and Aragon, essentially now Spain, would conquer Gibraltar, then force all non Christians who refused to convert to leave the kingdom. Spanish speaking Sephardic Jews would find refuge in Islamic kingdoms, notably the Ottoman Empire, all around the Mediterranean Sea. Those who did convert were later put under torturous loyalty tests to see if they weren't fake Christians, what Spanish people called conversos. So, which just means converts, but that was something you weren't deemed a real Christian if they knew that you had Jewish or Islamic ancestry. So this would be called the Spanish Inquisition. Muslims too were expelled in 1492, and we'll come back to them later. And remember, of course, 1492 is the same year that a certain fellow went sailing and discovered an entirely new continent. So you're all familiar with 1492 from that story. Here, I'll put myself down here. So, the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon were busy fighting the remnants of Islamic power on the peninsula. The Portuguese were slowly becoming a major maritime power in their own right. So that's why in the year that the Spanish conquered Gibraltar, a Portuguese port sent off the explorer Christopher Columbus. One interesting person who drove a lot of Portugal's transformation into a maritime power was the Prince Henry, known by the more flattering epithet than the kings of Leon, the Navigator. So, Prince Henry the Navigator. Henry the Navigator invested in the latest technology of shipbuilding. Portuguese sailors borrowed the Arabic idea of a triangular sail, which could be positioned using Bernoulli's principle against the wind. That basically, the higher the speed of a fluid, the lower the pressure. So, low speed versus high speed allows you to push and therefore lift an airplane wing or take a sail and positioning it just right, actually sail against the wind, sort of diagonally. So um, this was an absolutely huge innovation in making it possible to begin sailing down the coast of Africa. So Henry the Navigator was also a curious person who was fascinated by Marco Polo's accounts that we talked about last week. One of the things Marco Polo did was to build upon a medieval European legend of a fabulously wealthy hidden Christian kingdom somewhere in either Asia or Africa, led by the mythical Prester John. Some Europeans thought they may have found this kingdom in Christian Ethiopia, as ties between them and Europe strengthened during the Middle Ages. Henry the Navigator's dark side was his role in establishing Portuguese imperialism by taking over the Azores and Canary Islands, where the cultivation of sugarcane by slaves was pioneered by Europeans, as well as establishing which is still an autonomous region of Spain, not of Portugal anymore today, though it's in Africa, surrounded by Morocco. So, on the other side of the Sahara from Portugal, there was another kingdom undergoing profound changes in the late 1400s, Mali. We last talked about Mali when discussing Ibn Battuta's visit there last week, or discussing uh, his visit there 650 years ago last week. So, but by the 1480s, the Mali Empire had declined quite a bit from its heyday of power under Mansa Musa, when he made a Hajj where he reportedly left enough money in every city he visited to build a mosque, and spent so much money in Cairo that he caused inflation there for years after his visit. By the 1480s, though, the Mali Empire was dealing with the upstart kingdom of the Songhai and wasn't able to control trade routes or provide for law and order as they had previously been able. So a descendant of Mansa Musa named Mansa Mahmud II decided to emulate his famous ancestor by taking part in his own Hajj. So while in Egypt, he got a prominent religious teacher to declare that he was the Caliph of the Blacks. It was a flashy title, much like Charlemagne had gotten himself declared Holy Roman Emperor earlier. And like the Holy Roman Emperor's competitors, Mansa Mahmud's competitors didn't take his title very seriously either. Oh, there's my face again. Let's see if I can shrink that a bit. All right, put myself at the base of a Berber horse. All right, so one of the factors contributing to the eventual downfall of the Mali Empire, though it lingered on in rump form even longer than the Songhai who replaced them, was an attack in the 1490s by a group of Berbers mixed with Islamic exiles from Spain. So remember, Isabel forced all Jewish people and Muslims out of Spain in 1492. Well, many of these people joined with local Berbers just across the Mediterranean. Berbers were still are an ethnic group in much of northern Africa. They speak a language called Berber, live a typically nomadic lifestyle, or at least in the past have. So um, they joined with him, and after hearing of Mansa Mahmud trying to mimic his ancestor by spreading gold around, these people decided there's gold down there. So they decided to attack and get some of it for themselves. So they were in their behavior, they were very similar to the Christian Spanish conquistadores who would attack and plunder the gold of the New World only a few decades after their attack. So the Mali Empire would never recover from this attack. One of the shocking new weapons for West Africans that these, Spanish exiles and Berbers, so many Africans, of course, brought with them was gunpowder. The Malians knew what it was, of course, but they didn't have it, and they were poorly able to defend against it. So, over the next century, many West African leaders would make deals with outside powers in attempts to get access to the edge provided by firearms. So, one of the kingdoms in Africa that was on the edge of the Songhai, where the desire for firearms cast a long shadow, was that of Kanem Bornu. So one of their better known leaders, Idris Aluma, has a really interesting story that's been preserved that tells you a lot about how Kanem, how the people in so Kanem is it's a region in Nigeria today, and Bornu is um, it's like Cameroon and into Niger. But anyways, oops. Sorry, I had to stop for a minute. I heard someone calling me. But anyway, so yeah, Kanem Bornu, the territory that this kingdom covered is like modern day Nigeria, the northern little strip of Cameroon where it sticks up, goes into Niger in the north, and then Chad over to the east. So uh, this is one of their better known leaders, Idris Aluma, has an interesting story that has been preserved that tells you a lot about how they sought to navigate the period of increasing contact with Europeans on the one hand, but more importantly, the instability that was caused by upstart trade kingdoms gaining power through that trade. So Idris Aluma, he first turned to Islam, which and here I am covering this mosque. So he first turned to Islam, which had been an elite region for centuries, but a religion that was still resisted by many of the common people. So in his capital, Njimi, which stood near Lake Chad, there were plenty of people who practiced a local religion that, like many religions in the world, involved the veneration of a sacred tree. This idea is prominent in Abrahamic religions as well. So to make a point, he decided to cut down that tree and built a mosque in its place. To make a counterpoint, former worshippers of that tree would break into the mosque at night and, for lack of a better term, they pooped in it. So, according to the story, written from a pro-Aluma, pro-Islamic perspective, the devout Muslims fasted and prayed for help with this desecration, or defecation, I should say, and they received divine help. So the poopers were struck deaf and dumb for their sin, and the people of Najimi became devout Muslims. So one of the motivations to purify Islamic practice might too have been to attract the attention of the Ottoman Empire, which eventually sent people to train Aluma's soldiers in the proper use, maintenance, and manufacture of firearms, and the use of horses, the same weapons that the Spanish exiles and Berbers had previously used to terrorize the distant Mali Empire, and the same weapons which had allowed the Songhai to gain so much power. So I shared some examples above that aren't directly tied into your reading, just to try to better contextualize this reading within the genre of history we've been discussing so far this semester, and I wanted to better ground the dynamics of major kingdoms in this part of the world, as well as the motivations of Portuguese sailors in particular. So now we come to someone who is mentioned in your readings, Bumi Jalen. And I really like this map right here. It depicts some African kingdoms about 100 years after their first contact with the Portuguese. You see the kingdom of Jollof near the Atlantic Ocean, roughly where Senegal and Gambia are today. Mali and the Songhai aren't there anymore. In their place, you have a whole host of upstarts, some of which, like the Sokoto, would later become quite powerful. It still exists as an administrative region in Nigeria today. The leader, Bumi Jalen, is a great person for Northrop to focus on, and he does a masterful job trying to figure out his motivations in a way that's sympathetic to his religious motivations. So throughout the book, Northrop doesn't dismiss people's religious motivations as cynical, but rather takes them as sincere manifestations of faith in worldviews that he admits he doesn't necessarily understand. I'm very religious personally, so I get pretty suspicious anytime religious motivations are mixed with politics. You know, the desire for political gain through religious piety just about always cheapens the piety to the benefit of the political gain. So, in the midst of an internal power struggle with his brother in law, Bumi Jalen turned to the Portuguese for help. He wanted their guns, and in my assessment, accepted Christianity to better win their trust. What I see as a rather plain evidence of his duplicitous conversion was that after he was killed by Portuguese traders who were supposed to take him back home, they feared catching a tropical disease, so instead just killed him, despite the King of Portugal's desire to form an alliance with him. The Kingdom of Jolof returned to Islam. So, the Christianity seems like it was quite superficial. So as Portuguese trade intensified in West Africa, power began to shift from the large empires of the north to smaller kingdoms in the south that could monopolize trade. So, to become successful in this trade, many leaders adopted Christianity, but flourished through the completely unchristian practice of slavery. And obviously, this is exactly what the supposedly Christian European traders were after as well. So the vibrant West African Christianity today is largely a product of the post-colonial evangelism of its believers, who preach and share Christianity on their own terms, free of the strings of colonial power or earlier slavery. Islam had a similar history here, as I've stated in past weeks. Islam is a religion that promotes reverence of the divine, love of your neighbor, and peace. So when you mix Islam with slavery, it's kind of hard to take it seriously. So and that's why neither Islam nor Christianity were particularly strong in West Africa during the slave trade. But as the slave trade shifted away from the Sahara and towards the Atlantic Ocean, believers in Islam became more devout in their practice, and they sought out a purer form of the religion, at times seeking to replicate the practices at the time of the Prophet. So Islam would flourish in part as a form of resistance and protest to the increasingly dominant, supposedly Christian slave traders to the south. One of these kingdoms was Benin. Benin is a country today, but the kingdom was more in the part of Nigeria that's called Benin today, including the massive city of Lagos. So Oza Ozula flirted with Christianity there, he's mentioned in your book, as a way pretty clearly to secure firearms and trade. Wari, which was originally an outpost of Benin, is another of the examples Northrop gives of elites accepting Christianity. And again, he takes them seriously, which who am I to judge? But I'm clearly judging. I do not think it was serious like Northrop does. So the Portuguese continued plying their way down the continent, eventually rounding it and wreaking havoc on the kingdoms along the rim of the Indian Ocean. An early group that came into contact with the Portuguese was in Congo. Mani Congo Nzinga, pictured here, was a ruler who sought out the Portuguese for his own purposes in defeating rivals. He readily traded slaves for guns and supplies, leading to a completely evil trade cycle. He also accepted Christianity and supported the work of missionaries in spreading its message in his kingdom. So by the 1500s, Christianity spread as missionaries sought to find common ground between their faith, and native religious practices. Virtually anywhere in the world that major Abrahamic religions have spread, they've done so by embracing native forms of spirituality and recognizing how they fit within the broader, universalizing values of the religions that they're trying to proselyte. So, you've got a brief description of the East African coast. Swahili is such a fascinating language that shows the power of this world system in the period before widespread European contact, as well as the region's ability to resist European exploitation and endure through the difficulties of colonialism. Swahili is a syncretic language. It combines elements of Bantu languages with Arabic and Amharic. And Amharic and Arabic are, of course, both Semitic languages. Amharic spoken in Ethiopia. So it emerged first as a pidgin among traders, a combination of vocabulary from each other's languages, intended to facilitate communication, kind of like how people speak Spanglish sometimes. But it became a Creole, meaning a pidgin that is taught to children as their primary language. Haitian Creole is a very prominent example of this. So today, Swahili is spoken by over 100 million people, and it's an official language in several East African countries. So we'll come back to this area in the future week, but for now, a once prosperous area suffered immensely as the Portuguese tried to control trade here, rather than practice it freely as had been the expected norm for almost 1,000 years. Free trade and stability led it uh, led to incredible prosperity. So this would end with European colonialism, not just for Africa, but for all colonized peoples surrounding the Indian Ocean. This would go from being one of the wealthiest to one of the most poverty-stricken regions of the world, which is why I'm quite happy to see that it's bouncing back today. So Ethiopia had always been in contact with Christian Europe, but for much of late antiquity, they were more interested in the Christian kingdoms of the Mediterranean than they were with Roman Catholic Rome or other parts of Western Europe. Ethiopian Christians often chafed at the idea that they were to be subservient to either Rome or Constantinople. They had their own traditions that were just as ancient, and they were just as proud of them. But in the 1500s, Christian Ethiopians began to worry about the expanding power of their own Islamic neighbors, as well as the Ottoman Empire, so they sent emissaries to Rome, even though they found European practices to be a bit weird. In the 1500s, for example, Lebna Dengel wondered how the wars of the Reformation could be happening at all. How could Christians fight each other? He would have loved to have Christian kingdoms neighboring his own, he reasoned. So, to gain more support from Rome in the 1550s, Emperor Galodeos would attempt to change some Ethiopian practices to align themselves more with Rome. People revolted. In this same period, people in Russia were revolting in an attempt to align Russian church practices with those of the Patriarchate in Constantinople. Personal religion is too personal to change for political purposes. By 1648, European powers realized their dream of uniform global Christianity was a bit unattainable, and wars specifically fought over religion alone dropped off in Europe. Things calmed down in Ethiopia a bit after this period, too. So, hope you had fun. We were all over a continent with today's discussion. Um, so I have some bonus questions here for you, and as always, please reach out to me if you'd like to talk about anything. All right, have a good week, and please let me know what your paper ideas are.